Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to the channel. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we dive into this absolutely chilling story, drop a comment and let me know where in the world are you watching from. How are you doing today? And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next in this story. It's going to shake you to your core in ways you won't see coming. My name is Sadiq. I am nobody special. Just a boy who carried water for the palace kitchen in a kingdom where speaking the truth could get you killed. I come from a small village near the old forest, the place where the red earth never dries and the drums never stop beating after sunset. The place where mothers warn their children not to wander too far, not to listen when strange voices call your name in the darkness. Our kingdom had a prince. Prince Daramola. To the outside world, he was everything a prince should be. Handsome, with skin like polished mahogany and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of our ancestors. Rich beyond measure, draped in the finest Agbada robes woven with gold thread. People said he was kind, generous with his wealth, patient with the elders, beloved by the common folk. But behind the palace walls, those of us who served knew a different truth. Prince Daramola was wicked. Not the kind of wickedness you see in daylight, the cruelty of a harsh master or the greed of a corrupt official. No, this was something darker. Something that festered in the shadows and fed on silence. Every full moon, without fail, the prince demanded what he called his special meal. The first time I heard about it, I was barely 12 years old. I just started working in the palace kitchen, grateful for the few coins that kept my family from starving. The head cook, a woman named Mama Yoton with scars on her arms and secrets in her eyes, pulled me aside one evening. "Boy," she said, her voice low and urgent, "there are things you will see in this palace. Things you must never speak of. Not to your family. Not to your friends. Not even to yourself when you lay down to sleep." "What things, Mama?" I asked, my young heart racing. She looked toward the door, then back at me. "The prince does not eat goat. He does not eat chicken or cow. Every full moon, he requires something else." I didn't understand then. I wish I never had. The elders, those wise men who sat in the palace council chamber with their grey beards and solemn faces, told us it was a tradition. They said the kingdom would fall if the prince was not fed his special meal. They spoke of ancient agreements made with spirits in the forest, of blood pacts that kept our enemies at bay, of sacrifices that ensured our crops would grow and our children would be born healthy. It was all lies. Beautiful, terrible lies that let them sleep at night. Every month, one person disappeared. Sometimes it was a poor farmer from the outer villages, someone whose absence wouldn't cause too much noise. Sometimes a market woman who'd angered the wrong official. Sometimes, God forgive us, a child, an orphan with no one to search for them, no one to ask questions. And we all knew where they went. The palace kept meticulous records of grain and livestock, but there was one ledger that was never written down. One count that existed only in whispered numbers and averted eyes. 23 people in my first year working there. 41 by my third year. No one cried out loud anymore. We learned quickly that crying was dangerous. Grief was dangerous. Questions were dangerous. So we bowed our heads. We did our work. We pretended not to notice when the guards came to collect someone in the dead of night, when the screams echoed from the old cooking shed behind the palace, when the smell of roasting meat filled the corridors and made our stomachs turn. We became accomplices through our silence. I carried water. I scrubbed floors. I kept my eyes down and my mouth shut. Until the night they took my cousin Musa. Musa was only 16, barely a man, with a laugh that could light up a room and dreams of becoming a blacksmith like our grandfather. He'd come to the palace that week to deliver iron tools, never knowing he'd been marked. I saw the guards come for him just after sunset. They moved like shadows, efficient and emotionless, men who'd done this so many times it had become routine. They dragged him into the palace kitchen while I stood frozen near the water barrels. His eyes found mine across the room, wide with terror, glistening with unshed tears. His mouth was shaking, words forming that his voice was too frightened to speak. Finally, he managed to whisper, "Please, Sadiq, tell my mother I tried to run." I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight. I wanted to grab a knife from the cutting table and drive it into the heart of every man who'd let this evil continue. But I could not speak. My legs would not move. Cowardice is a heavy thing to carry. Heavier than any water bearer I ever lifted. They dragged him past me, out the back door, toward the old cooking shed where the special meals were prepared. I heard the sound. That terrible sound I can still hear in my nightmares. Like a goat being cut. But worse. Because it was Musa. Because it was family. Because it was wrong in every way the human soul knows wrong. Later, I don't know how much later, time stopped meaning anything, they made me wash the blood from the floor. My hands would not stop shaking. They have never stopped shaking since. As if Musa wasn't dead. as if I wasn't standing in the corner, holding a water jug, watching my cousin being eaten piece by piece. The main course came next, roasted meat with yam porridge and a side of vegetables cooked in palm oil. Prince Daramola reached for his wine glass and took a long drink. Then he picked up a particularly large piece of meat and bit into it. At first, nothing seemed wrong. He chewed, swallowed, reached for another piece. Then he paused. His hand, halfway to his mouth, began to tremble. The meat fell from his fingers and landed on the gold plate with a soft thud. "Your Highness." Mama Yatan stepped forward. "Is something?" The prince started to choke. Not delicately, not like someone who'd swallowed wrong. He choked like a man drowning on dry land, gasping and clawing at his throat. His chair scraped backward as he stood, stumbling, his eyes bulging. At first, we thought he was playing some sick game. The prince was known for his cruel sense of humor. But then his eyes rolled back until only the whites showed. Black liquid, thick as oil, dark as midnight, began to pour from his nose and mouth. It spilled down his pristine white agbada, staining the fabric with patterns that looked almost like writing in a language none of us could read. He fell from his chair. The sound of his body hitting the floor was like thunder. And then he started to scream. Not like a man. Not like any human throat should be able to produce. Like an animal. Like something wild and wounded and full of ancient rage. The sound clawed at our ears, at our sanity. It was pain and fury and terror all mixed together, multiplied by something inhuman. The servants scattered, running for the doors. But the doors wouldn't open. I pulled at the handle with all my strength. Others joined me, all of us desperate to escape that sound, that room, that cursed place. The doors were sealed shut by some force I couldn't understand. Then the lights went out. All of them. Every lamp, every candle, every torch in the palace extinguished simultaneously as if a giant hand had snuffed them out. Darkness swallowed us whole. In that darkness, Prince Daramola's screams changed. They became words, but words in a language that hurt to hear, that made my head pound and my vision swim even though I couldn't see anything. The drums outside stopped. Every drummer in the kingdom, all at once, fell silent. In my entire life, I had never known the drums to stop after sunset. Never. The silence was worse than the screaming. And then, in that terrible quiet, we heard it, a slow dripping sound. Drip, drip, drip. Someone found a lamp and managed to light it with shaking hands. The walls were bleeding. Real blood, thick and red and warm, running down the painted surfaces like rain. It poured on the floor, spreading toward our feet, carrying with it the smell of copper and death and something else. Something rotten and old. We ran. I don't remember the order of things after that. I remember pushing past people, sleeping in blood, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would break my ribs. I found a space under the palace stairs, a small crawl space where servants sometimes hid when the prince's temper flared. I wedged myself into the darkness and stayed there, trembling, praying to every god and ancestor I could name. Outside, the screaming continued. Inside my hiding place, I pressed my hands over my ears and tried not to exist. I stayed there until morning. Dawn came slowly, reluctantly, as if the sun itself was afraid to look at what had happened in our kingdom. I emerged from under the stairs like a creature crawling from a grave, stiff, disoriented, unsure if I was alive or if this was some strange afterlife where guilt took the form of palace corridors. The palace was silent. Not the peaceful silence of early morning, but the silence of a tomb. The silence of a place where something terrible has happened and the very air holds its breath. Blood still stained the walls, but it had dried to a dark brown crust. In the pale morning light, the patterns it had made looked even more like writing, symbols that hurt my eyes when I tried to focus on them. I made my way to the prince's dining chamber on legs that barely held me. The door stood open. Inside, the room was destroyed. Furniture overturned, dishes shattered, food scattered across the floor. The gold plates were bent and twisted as if massive hands had crumpled them like paper. But Prince Daramola was gone. Only his clothes remained, that pristine white agbada, now stained black and torn, lay in a heap near his overturned chair. The coral beads had been scattered across the floor, some of them cracked and split. And there were footprints. Black footprints, like someone had stepped in tar or ink, leading from where the prince had fallen, across the room, out the door, down the corridor, through the palace, and out toward the forest. I followed them. I don't know why. Maybe because I needed to know. Maybe because I was still in shock. Maybe because some part of me hoped this was all a terrible dream and following those footprints would wake me up. The prince led through the palace gates, which stood wide open. The guards who should have been posted there were nowhere to be seen. They led past the outer buildings. They led to the edge of the old forest. And there, they disappeared into the darkness between the trees. I stood at that threshold for a long time, staring into the shadows where the footprints vanished, trying to understand what had happened. Behind me, I heard movement. I turned to find Mama Yotan approaching, wrapped in a faded wrapper, her face haggard and aged 10 years overnight. Don't follow them, boy, she said quietly. Nothing good comes from following those tracks. What happened to him? I asked, my voice cracking. What happened to the prince? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the forest with eyes that had seen too much. Justice, she finally said. Or revenge. Or both. The old spirits don't make those distinctions the way we do. What do you mean? Your cousin Musa, she said, and my heart clenched at his name. He was different from the others. Did you know he'd been to see the forest oracle 3 days before they took him? I shook my head. Musa had never mentioned it. He knew they were coming for him, Mama Yotan continued. He felt it. So he went to the oracle and made an offering. He asked for protection. Protection. I laughed bitterly. The oracle failed him. He's dead. Is he? She turned to look at me, and something in her eyes made my blood run cold. The oracle works in ways we don't understand, Sadiq. Protection doesn't always mean what we think it means. Sometimes protection means ensuring your death isn't meaningless. Sometimes it means your bones will have teeth. I didn't understand. Not then. The prince ate your cousin's flesh, she explained. But your cousin's spirit was prepared. Protected. Blessed or cursed, depending on how you see it. And when the prince consumed that protected flesh, she didn't need to finish. I understood. Musa had become poison. Holy, righteous poison. The elders are gathering, Mama Yotan said, changing the subject abruptly. They'll want to speak about what happened. They'll try to explain it away, to maintain control. But the truth is out now, Sadiq. The walls bled. The drums stopped. Half the kingdom saw it. She was right. By midday, the palace courtyard was filled with people. Elders in their traditional robes, chiefs with their staffs of office, concerned citizens who'd heard the screams and seen the bleeding walls. The head elder, a man named Chief Adeyemi with a white beard down to his chest and a reputation for wisdom, stood before the crowd. People of the kingdom, he began, his voice grave. Last night, a great tragedy befell us. Prince Daramola has been taken by the old spirits of the forest. They have claimed him for breaking sacred laws. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. What laws? Someone shouted. What did the prince do? Chief Adeyemi's face twitched. There are traditions older than memory, agreements made between our ancestors and the spirits of the land. Sometimes these agreements demand prices we don't fully understand. Stop lying. The shout came from the back of the crowd. Everyone turned. An old woman pushed her way forward, Mama Kaik, whose son had disappeared 6 full moons ago. Her face was twisted with years of suppressed grief and rage. Stop lying to us, she screamed again. We all know what the prince did. We all know about the special meals. We stayed silent because we were afraid, but the spirits weren't afraid. The spirits knew. The spirits saw. Mama Kaik, please, Chief Adeyemi raised his hands, trying to calm her. My son, she wailed. My beautiful boy. You fed him to that monster. You all did. And now you want to call it tradition. You want to call it sacred. Others joined her cry. Voices rose, angry and raw with years of hidden pain. My daughter. My brother. My wife. The crowd became a chorus of grief, and Chief Adeyemi's control shattered like the prince's gold plates. That's when I stepped forward. I don't know what gave me the courage. Maybe it was Musa's ghost. Maybe it was just exhaustion with being afraid. I was there, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. I saw what happened. And I know where the prince's spirit went. Everyone fell silent. Chief Adeyemi's eyes fixed on me with barely concealed fury. Boy, you should. He went into the forest, I continued, ignoring him. And he's still there. I've heard him. That part was true. Even as I stood there speaking, I could hear faint sounds from the tree line, crying, moaning, sounds that made my skin crawl. The spirits didn't take him to punish him, I said. They took him to keep him. To make him understand what he did. To make him feel what his victims felt. How dare you speak of, Chief Adeyemi started. Every full moon, I interrupted, louder now, we hear him in the forest. Crying. Hungry. Calling names. The crowd pressed closer, hanging on my words. I looked Chief Adeyemi dead in the eyes and finished, sometimes, he calls mine. The weeks after the prince's disappearance were strange. The kingdom fell into a kind of collective shock. Everyone knew something terrible had happened, but no one quite knew how to process it or what to do next. The elders tried to maintain order, but their authority had been shaken. When the walls of the palace bled, when the drum stopped, when the prince vanished leaving only black footprints and screams, well, even the most elaborate lies couldn't cover that up. People started talking. Quietly at first, in whispered conversations at the market or around cooking fires at night. Then louder, bolder, as the fear that had kept them silent for so long began to transform into anger. Did you hear? They say the prince ate people. My cousin worked in the palace. She said they took someone every full moon. The spirits punished him. Finally, someone was punished. The palace kitchen was shut down. Mama Yaton disappeared. Some said she'd fled to another kingdom, others claimed she'd walked into the forest and never returned. I hoped she'd found peace somewhere, but I doubted it. Peace doesn't come easy when your hands have prepared that many bodies. I was questioned by the elders 3 times. Each time, they asked the same things. What exactly had I seen? Had the prince said anything before he transformed? Did I know anything about Musa visiting the forest oracle? Each time, I told them only what I'd already said publicly. I didn't mention the details, the black liquid, the inhuman screams, the way the blood on the walls had seemed to write words. Some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud. After the 3rd questioning, Chief Adeyemi pulled me aside. You're playing a dangerous game, boy, he said, his voice low and threatening. Making accusations. Spreading fear. I only spoke the truth, I replied, surprised by my own courage. Truth. He laughed bitterly. Truth is whatever keeps the kingdom stable. Truth is whatever prevents chaos. You think you're helping by exposing what happened. You're destroying us. We were already destroyed, I said. We destroyed ourselves the first time we let an innocent person die and called it tradition. His hand shot out and gripped my arm, hard enough to bruise. Watch yourself, Sadiq. The prince may be gone, but there are others who benefit from maintaining certain arrangements. Others who won't take kindly to a water boy who thinks he can change centuries of tradition. He released me and walked away, leaving me trembling. But he was right to be worried. Because things were changing. Families who'd lost loved ones began gathering at the palace gates every evening, demanding answers. They wanted to know who had been taken, when, and why. They wanted justice not just for the prince's crimes, but for everyone who'd enabled them. The kingdom was waking up from a long, terrible sleep. And then the full moon came again. I'd been dreading it. We all had. The drums started at sunset, as they always did, but this time they sounded different, anxious, erratic, like the drummers were afraid of what the night might bring. I was in my family's compound when I first heard it. A voice, distant but clear, carrying on the wind from the forest. Sadiq. My blood turned to ice. It was Prince Daramola's voice. But wrong. Twisted. Like his throat had forgotten how to shape human sounds and was doing its best imitation. Sadiq. I'm hungry. My mother grabbed my arm. Don't listen, she hissed. Don't answer. Don't even look toward the forest. But how could I not? Other people heard it too. I could see them emerging from their homes, standing in doorways, looking toward the tree line with wide, frightened eyes. Sadiq, come to me, bring me food. The voice was closer now. How was it closer? He's coming out of the forest, someone whispered. No, an elder said firmly. The spirits keep him bound there. He can't leave. He can only call. Then why does he sound closer? No one had an answer. The calling continued all night. Sometimes it was my name. Sometimes other names, people who'd worked in the palace, people who'd served him, people who'd known what he was doing and stayed silent. Mama Yechuand, where did you go? Chief Adeyemi. I remember your voice. Liam, you brought them to me. That last one made my ears perk up. Liam had been the head guard, the one who'd personally selected many of the prince's victims. He disappeared the day after the prince vanished. Now I knew why. As dawn approached, the calling faded but didn't stop entirely. Even in daylight, if you stood quiet and listened carefully, you could hear it, a faint whisper from the forest, hungry and lonely and full of rage. This became our new normal. Every full moon, the prince called to us from the forest. Sometimes the voices were desperate and pleading. Sometimes they were angry and threatening. Sometimes they were sad, almost pitiable. But always hungry. Always calling names. People started leaving offerings at the forest edge, not for the prince, but for the spirits who kept him bound there. Fruits, flowers, palm wine. Small tributes of gratitude to whatever forces had delivered justice when human law had failed. I never left offerings. Instead, I started visiting Musa's grave every week. My aunt had buried him, or at least, we'd held a ceremony with an empty coffin, since there was nobody to bury. She'd chosen a spot under a mango tree where Musa used to play as a child. I'm sorry, I told him during one visit, months after everything had happened. I'm sorry I didn't save you. I'm sorry I was too afraid to act. The wind rustled through the mango leaves, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I heard Musa's laugh, that bright, joyful sound I'd loved. You did save me, a voice seemed to whisper. You told the truth. That's more than most people ever do. I don't know if I really heard it or if grief was playing tricks on my mind. But from that day forward, I made a promise. I would never be silent in the face of evil again. No matter how afraid I was. No matter what it cost. Because silence had fed the prince just as surely as human flesh had. And I was done feeding monsters. A year passed since the night Prince Daramola disappeared into the forest. The kingdom changed in ways both visible and invisible. Visible, the palace was converted into a memorial. Each room where someone had been taken, each corner where blood had been spilled, was marked with a plaque bearing the victim's name. 41 plaques in the first year. More were added as people came forward with stories of loved ones who'd vanished before I started working there. The old cooking shed where the preparations had happened was torn down completely. In its place, families planted a garden, vegetables and flowers growing from soil that had been soaked with so much pain. Invisible, the way people looked at each other changed. There was shame in many eyes, shame at having known, having suspected, having stayed silent. But there was also a strange kind of relief. The secret was out. The wound was open. And open wounds, painful as they are, can at least begin to heal. I became an unexpected voice in the kingdom. People sought me out, asking me to speak at gatherings, to share what I'd witnessed. At first, I refused. I was just a water boy. Who was I to lead anything? But Mama Kike, the woman who'd first broken the silence in public, came to me one evening. You think you're not important because you carried water, she said, settling her weathered frame on my family's compound wall. But water is what sustains life, Sadiq. And truth is what sustains dignity. You carried both. That makes you exactly who we need. So I started speaking. I told Musa's story. I told the stories of others I'd learned about. I spoke about the lies the elders had told, the way fear had been used to control us, the cost of silence. Some people loved me for it. Others hated me. Chief Adeyemi and the remaining elders tried to discredit me, calling me a liar, a troublemaker, a boy seeking attention. But too many people had seen the bleeding walls. Too many had heard the screams. Too many had lost loved ones. The truth, once freed, cannot be caged again. The full moon callings continued like clockwork. Every month, as the moon swelled fat and bright, we'd hear Prince Daramola's voice crying out from the forest. Over time, the voice changed, became less human, more animal. Sometimes it sounded like wind through trees. Sometimes like an animal in pain. Sometimes like many voices speaking at once. People learned to live with it. We'd pause in our conversations when we heard it, acknowledge it with a moment of silence, then continue. It became a reminder, a monthly memorial to what we'd survived and what we must never allow again. I heard my name called 7 times that first year. Each time, my heart would race and my hands would shake. But I never answered. Never went to the forest edge. Never acknowledged the voice beyond the whispered prayer for Musa and all the others. On the anniversary of that terrible night, the kingdom held a ceremony. We gathered at the forest edge, hundreds of us, maybe thousands. Families of the victims stood at the front, each holding a candle. Mama Kike spoke first, her voice strong despite her age. We gather here to remember those we lost. Not just to death, but to silence. We remember, and we promise, never again. Never again, the crowd echoed. I spoke next, sharing Musa's story one more time. How he'd known his fate and gone to the oracle. How his protected spirit had become the poison that finally stopped the prince's evil. How one young man's courage had broken a cycle of horror that had lasted generations. As I spoke, the sun set. The full moon rose. And from the forest, right on schedule, we heard it, Sadiq. But this time, I didn't flinch. This time, I turned toward the sound and spoke clearly. I hear you, Prince Daramola. The whole kingdom hears you. And we'll keep hearing you every full moon for the rest of time. Let your cries remind us what happens when we choose comfort over conscience, when we call evil tradition, when we sacrifice the innocent to feed the guilty. The forest went silent. Completely, utterly silent. For the first time in a year, the prince's voice stopped mid-call. The crowd held its breath. Then, from deep within the forest, we heard something new, not the prince's voice, but something else. Something older. It sounded almost like laughter. Or was it the wind? Or the trees themselves, amused by my defiance? Whatever it was, it felt like acknowledgement. Like the spirits were pleased. The ceremony continued. We lit our candles, said our prayers, shared our memories. As the night deepened, people began to sing old songs, songs of resilience and survival, songs our ancestors had sung through their own dark times. I found myself standing next to Mama Kike as we sang. She took my hand and squeezed it. You did good, boy, she said. Your cousin would be proud. Tears streamed down my face. I hope so. I know so. She smiled. Because you turned his death into something meaningful. You made sure he didn't die for nothing. As the ceremony ended and people began to disperse, I stayed a while longer, staring into the forest. I thought about Musa. About the prince. About all 41 victims. About justice and revenge and the blurry line between them. I thought about how sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to become a kind of monster yourself, to let rage become poison, to let death become a weapon. And I thought about how I'd spent a year learning to live with the sound of my name being called from darkness. The prince still calls. He calls every full moon without fail. Sometimes he calls my name. Sometimes others. He cries. He begs. He rages. He is hungry. He will always be hungry. And we will always hear him. But now, instead of fear, his voice brings something else, a reminder that evil, no matter how powerful, no matter how deeply rooted in tradition, can be stopped. Maybe not the way we expect. Maybe not without cost. But it can be stopped. I am Sadiq. I carried water for a palace that fed on flesh. I watched my cousin die. I saw a prince transform into a monster. And I lived to tell the truth. Some nights, when the moon is full and I hear my name floating on the wind from the forest, I whisper back. I remember, Musa. I'll always remember. And somewhere in the darkness, I like to think he hears me.